They were already 3 minutes late, which in the RK Sovereign Chamber was not merely discourtesy, but a diplomatic tremor felt like a shudder beneath centuries of unspoken protocols and unbroken patterns. And as the silence stretched into its fourth minute, the ambient temperature of the room adjusted slightly, automated out of politeness, not tension. Though none of the elder races believed that Lai, any more Chancellor Varx of the Archi, did not shift in his crystalline seat nor turn toward the empty space reserved for the Terran envoy, because such motions were considered performative and, beneath the dignity of a mind evolved beyond displays of emotion. But he did lower the second lid over his left eye, a subtle but deliberate marker of irritation known only to species with sufficiently advanced diplomatic training or the instincts of predatory civilizations with long memories and longer grudges. Across from him, High Admiral Keshorn of the Vakari Dominion flexed one clawed hand just above the surface of the negotiation table, her scaled skin catching the low diplomatic lighting like a weapon too refined to draw blood accidentally. And her voice, when it came, was low and clear, barbed in logic rather than volume, as she said, "When a species arrives late to a council with 27 civilizations more advanced than itself, one wonders if it is due to hubris or ignorance. Disguised as independence, Ambassador Thren of the Nightlight Fold, whose species communicated primarily through bioluminescence and atmospheric modulation, allowed her coral veined torso to pulse a pale orange before speaking in the synthetically smooth tones of her translator. Humanity has never claimed to understand our customs, but they have, in several instances, demonstrated an aptitude for adaptation that suggests their errors may be rehearsed rather than accidental." A rustle moved through the chamber, like dry leaves stirring on the surface of a forgotten world. But it was no breeze, merely a collective recalibration of breathing and posture as the great hall doors parted not with dramatic flourish, but with understated finality. And through them stepped the Terran delegation in attire so simple it bordered on disrespect, though the precision of their stride suggested anything but a casual entrance. Leading them was Colonel Wisra Talib of the United Terran Strategic Command. Not an ambassador but a military liaison appointed as part of Earth's decision to remain functionally neutral while also declining all offers of external protection. And her expression was not warm, nor apologetic, nor assertive. It was observant. In the same way, a field commander might study terrain that would soon be soaked in either ink or blood. Behind her walked Sato Anand, Earth's appointed diplomatic analyst, carrying nothing but a foldable data panel and a gesture of welcome so subtly calculated it fell between sincerity and challenge. The exact midpoint where humanity seemed to conduct all its affairs lately. Colonel Talib took her place with the minimum movement required and did not offer a bow or a nod, but instead placed both hands on the reflective table and said, "We acknowledge the delay and apologize with full intent. Our arrival was postponed due to the unexpected recalibration of our encryption array in response to 3 unauthorized pings from a Korvathi military satellite array on our trade route vector 79. We interpreted them as a non-random triangulation attempt and suspended all diplomatic signal emissions until redundancy protocols confirmed safety of transmission." The silence afterward was not stunned, because these were not beings given to such simple responses, but it had the character of a tactical reassessment occurring simultaneously across 27 distinct minds, all weighing the cost-benefit of pushing further versus retreating into the ambiguous shelter of diplomatic etiquette. Chancellor Varax's voice, when it finally came, had the soft cadence of falling ash and a lethality woven between syllables that required no elevation to be felt. "That does not explain why your delay was not accompanied by a formal notification. Even a Class F emergency signal would have sufficed." Saito Anand answered before the colonel could, his voice light but unhurried, the sort of tone one might use when correcting a professor on a historical footnote without intending offense but also without fearing it. We do not broadcast Class F emergency signals through open interstellar bands unless immediate threats are confirmed. And given that the satellite array appeared Covathi in origin, we felt it prudent to wait for internal confirmation before escalating the matter in front of sovereign observers, who may or may not have been aware of the ping's transmission origin. For the briefest moment, Admiral Keshoran's tail shifted by less than a degree. And though the movement was imperceptible to the untrained, to the seasoned it signaled calculation layered upon insult. And the Vakari replied, "You imply that we are either behind the breach or incapable of maintaining command discipline within our own arrays." An accusation that, if unfounded, constitutes provocation under Accord's Article 16. Colonel Talib's eyes did not flicker toward the Admiral as she responded, her voice a practiced neutrality that somehow made each syllable feel heavier than the last. "We imply nothing. We are stating the procedural logic of our defense systems, which react based on pre-coded threat hierarchies. It is not an accusation, but a technical fact. We are here because we trust this council will review all parties' satellite logs and assign clarity through objective evaluation, not postured indignation, a pause extended like the drawing of a breath in a room that hadn't needed to breathe. For centuries," and then the Arcade Chancellor spoke once more, his voice a sharpened thread stitched with ice. "Humanity has advanced in physical capability, certainly, and your ship production rates alone suggest you either foresee coming war or intend to dictate peace through threat. What the Accord requires understanding of is whether your ethical philosophy will mature as rapidly as your fleet manifests its armor." Saito did not smile, and neither did the Colonel, but there was something in the narrowing of their eyes that suggested the beginning of a line being drawn in their minds, not a red one, not a breaking one, but a diagnostic threshold of patience and perception. Saito said, "We do not build fleets because we expect to fire them, Chancellor. We build them because we arrived late to a galaxy that already had rules written in plasma and silence. We came not to rewrite those rules, but to survive their enforcement. Without losing the parts of ourselves we still believe are worth exporting beyond Earth." No one applauded, because in this place there was no applause, only recalibration, and, in the microsecond of pause between those words and the next procedural item on the docket, the galaxy, at least this small chamber of it, recognized something it hadn't expected so soon. Earth had not come with teeth bared, but the bite was already being measured all the same. The first of the cloaked movements began 6 hours after Earth's delegation departed the Arcade Sovereign Chamber, and though they were subtle enough to be dismissed by less meticulous analysts, Commander Idris Monroe of Terran Naval Intelligence was not in the habit of dismissing anything that occurred within 5 parsecs of a diplomatic broadcast delay, especially not when 3 of the cloaked vessels matched the energy signature of Covathi patrol-class interceptors designed for close-range data theft and rapid withdrawal under tactical camouflage protocols. Commander Monroe was not a man known for smiles nor for excessive commentary, and while others in the upper strata of Earth's military command leaned heavily into ceremony and presence, he favored the quiet application of reason sharpened by repeated proximity to classified failure. And his office aboard Calderon, the diplomatic escort vessel orbiting the Delian Crescent, reflected that discipline with its barren walls, redundant data ports, and a singular unmarked display on which he now studied orbital drift variances with a calm intensity that unnerved even his own team. "Run the ARC-3 overlay," he said, without lifting his eyes from the pattern. "Compare ship drift against known gravitational anomalies in Sector Theta. Isolate for artificial resistance fluctuations. Full-frame composite. No smoothing." Lieutenant Koji responded with silent precision, fingers tapping faster than most officers could process the request. And when the model resolved, the room's central holomap changed from a peaceful spread of commercial drift to a scattered lattice of small resistance hums forming an almost elegant arc pattern just outside. Earth's declared expansion buffer asterisk, Idris, leaned back slightly, his eyes never blinking as he said, "They're not mapping our colonies. They're testing route projection algorithms against our crisis response protocols, probably feeding stress data into predictive models, maybe even refining their ghost-cum distortion thresholds." Koji hesitated before responding, her voice cautious but steady. "The pings match Korvathi origin as far as we can triangulate. But there's Vocari signal degradation embedded in the ghost layers, which means either it's an unregistered dual operation or a third party is piggybacking on old communication overlays." Idris nodded once, the gesture small but affirming. "Or someone wants us to think that, which means it's working on at least 3 layers of plausible deniability. That makes this a prelude to positioning not for skirmish, but for narrative ownership. Asterisk." Elsewhere on the ship, in a chamber more filled with words than warnings, Saito Anen was debriefing Earth's diplomatic team on what would soon be leaked to the media feeds across a dozen interstellar news networks. The Vocari's proposal for a mutual defense pact that, upon close reading, demanded that Earth cede sovereignty over its trade security protocols and permit observation ports within 2 of its outer colonies under the pretext of cultural alignment training. "They're not asking us to sign protection," Saito said quietly as he highlighted key clauses with a flick of his fingers. "They're asking us to volunteer for supervisory conditioning under threat of being labeled unpredictable, which in this galaxy is the diplomatic equivalent of arming a warhead with your name etched on the casing and handing it to your neighbor for safekeeping." Ambassador Leon spoke up for the first time since arriving on the Calderon. Her background, not in negotiation, but in interspecies behavioral linguistics. And her tone carried the weight of someone who had spent too long decoding intention from syntax. "The Vocari don't expect us to accept," she said flatly. "They expect us to reject it loudly, and then they'll use that reaction to justify a coalition proposal to the Accord to increase containment initiatives around emergent civilizations with accelerated militarization patterns." Saito nodded, the edge of his jaw tightening slightly. "Which is why we won't reject it loudly, we'll accept it politely, pending a 3-month ethical review by our Interstellar Law Committee and an internal planetary referendum. All standard Terran procedure, of course. We'll drown them in bureaucracy and public ethics declarations while we reinforce the Sagittarius corridor under full civilian observation." There was a moment of pause, not hesitation but respect, and then the room moved. In silent agreement, Earth would not match provocation with protest. It would match it with precision, and the Terran counterweight would be slow, legal, inevitable back on the bridge. Monroe issued a quiet order that did not match the tone of his posture, though its implications were clear. "Tag the interceptors as Echo class," he said. "Issue passive counterdrift protocols to all nearby transports. Reroute supply lanes using trade contingency Delta 7. And assign cloaked overwatch via whisper ring until further notice." Koji raised one brow. An unspoken question hanging in the air. Monroe answered without waiting for it. "If they're mapping us, we map them harder. And if they expect us to flinch, we make stillness look like calculation, not uncertainty." Elsewhere, the first independent Terran scout ship exited its FTL corridor with diplomatic tags displayed and hull integrity transmitters active. Was hailed within seconds by 3 unknown relays. None of the pings came from registered Accord members, and all of them asked the same thing: "State your purpose." "Terran vessel." The human captain replied with the voice of Earth's oldest code: "Observation and patience. Until one of you forgets we warned you, we were paying attention." The beacon was found 12 hours after its last distress signal, spinning slowly through the vacuum above the Talisa Rift, trailing a fine mist of evaporating coolant that glowed against the nearest star like a blood-stained thread pulled loose. from the body of an unseen warhead belonged to the Martin's Hale, a Terran civilian science vessel tasked with surveying dark matter radiation pockets near the unstable edge of the Sagittarius expansion zone, a region clearly charted in the Accord as neutral, non-strategic, and without resource density sufficient to draw even minor interest, at least until Earth's gravitational anomaly models suggested otherwise. There were no escape pods detected, no transmissions after the static burst that had choked the comms relay 2 hours prior to total silence, and the ship's transponder was retrieved half embedded in the external hull of a shattered Calvati satellite, a piece of decommissioned equipment not listed on any official orbital map in the war rooms beneath New Geneva. Terran Command examined the recovered data with the precision of a surgeon forced to operate without anesthesia. And while the images showed no weapons fire, no debris pattern consistent with direct assault, and no standard evidence of aggression, every line of telemetry pulsed with the unmistakable rhythm of entrapment, General Soraya Clark stood before the full composite display, arms crossed and shoulders squared beneath the steel gray of Earth's active duty insignia, her voice calm but leaving no room for misinterpretation as she said, "There are 2 types of war declarations in this galaxy, those made with words and those made by pretending. You weren't the one holding the knife after the blood's already on the floor. This is the latter." Across from her, Director Chun of the Terran Foreign Bureau remained seated, his expression unreadable beneath decades of practiced neutrality, though his fingers tapped once against the desk before he spoke. Officially, the Calvati claimed the Martin's Hale veered off path into their classified observation corridor and triggered a fail-safe drone sequence. They've offered condolences, but no admission of fault, and they've requested to jointly investigate the matter under supervised arbitration. Clark didn't blink. They want us to bring the crime scene into their jurisdiction before we finish the autopsy. Chun gave a thin nod, and the Accord seems willing to let them host it. The Vocari have already expressed concern about Terran reactionism, and the Archive have proposed a neutral panel to delay immediate conclusions. Colonel Taleb, present via secure uplink from the Cauldron, leaned forward slightly in the projection, her voice cutting through the diplomatic hesitation like wire through fabric. If we let this stand, we redefine acceptable loss as long as it's framed with plausible ambiguity and flagged as a navigational incident, which means every Terran ship beyond the Sol Core becomes an expendable token in someone else's long game. It was Sato Anand who proposed the solution, and when he spoke it was with the kind of restraint that carried the weight of lethal implications. We don't accuse them, we don't escalate, and we don't withdraw. Instead, we demand the full satellite logs from the Corvathi observation corridor under Accord transparency protocols, including time-stamped telemetry streams and transponder audit trails for the last 40 rotations. And we pair the request with an open-source analysis from our own forensic, to be broadcast across the Concord network in real time with diplomatic neutrality markers attached to prevent suppression. Chun raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting we make the accusation without speaking it and force the galaxy to see the truth before anyone can refute it officially. Sato nodded once. We won't be the ones who light the match, but we'll make sure every species with a lens sees where the fire started. The message was sent within 36 hours. Terran intelligence analysts decrypted faint traces of cross-signal distortion buried inside the Martin's Hale's last comms burst, pinpointing it to a falsified relay bounce consistent with trap curve lures used in naval war simulations by the Calvati 10 cycles ago. Data was published. The reactions were immediate, not loud, but strategic. 2 minor species publicly withdrew their commercial treaties with the Calvati, citing trust uncertainties, while 3 independent Accord mediators placed an open review embargo on the investigation, request pending impartial arbitration. The Calvati responded by launching a diplomatic counterstatement accusing Earth of data manipulation. But their own logs, when released in an attempt to prove innocence, confirmed that 3 of the observation drones near the rift had been manually reprogrammed to mask transponder echoes. They had gambled that Earth would retaliate with weapons. Earth retaliated with proof, and now the galaxy had to choose whether to interpret that proof as arrogance or discipline. And for the first time in generations, a military incident had occurred without a single plasma round fired. And yet the political debris was far harder to contain than wreckage in space. Meanwhile, in the black between stars, Terran Command initiated the contingency plan titled Protocol Echo. Commander Idris Monroe received his classified brief with a single directive: recover the unrecovered. His reply was issued without ceremony, his tone flat as alloy. Copy. Initializing hunt vector. Engaging silent mode. Full black. They fired a net and called it a test. Let's show them how humanity answers when the net tears. The strike team did not depart with a declaration nor with fanfare. It left no wake in the ComNet and no spike in planetary power output. It passed through Earth's orbital perimeter in the silence reserved for the dead or the deeply classified. The ship they took was listed as a cargo hauler on all public transponder bands, registered to a Terran agricultural firm operating along the Kuiper margin. Its true designation, however, was TSV Aegis Red, a stealth-adapted reconnaissance vessel operating under Protocol Echo, Earth's standing order for intelligence recovery without formal engagement. It was not a ship of war. It was a scalpel carried in a closed-fist asterisk. Commander Idris Monroe stood on the bridge beneath dim tactical lights, arms folded behind his back, face illuminated only by the steady glow of encrypted telemetry feeds. His silence neither inviting nor dismissive, but rather a space carved out for absolute concentration. The crew around him was hand-selected for latency discipline and neural interface compatibility. None above the rank of lieutenant, all of them certified in Tier 4 conflict quietus doctrine, which permitted non-lethal disabling of hostile systems, without diplomatic classification as aggression, so long as no blood was spilled and no sovereign structure breached without warning. Sector vector confirmed, came the voice of Lieutenant Koji from her station, her words clipped, low, and void of rhetorical pacing. We've intercepted residual heat traces matching 3 energy footprints from known Kovathi interceptors. Cloak signatures weak, possibly damaged or overclocked. We're within range for passive resonance mapping. No need to break stealth. Grid. Monroe's answer came without delay. Initiate slow drift into their echo envelope. I want full rotational overlay on their hull scatter. Prioritize venting cycles and exhaust rhythm. Target crew life support cadence, not weapon signatures. To most species, that order would have made little sense, but to Earth's new generation of tacticians, it meant everything. Where others hunted power spikes and shield surges, humans studied breath patterns, heat rhythms, the slow heartbeat of a living vessel and its occupants. The Kovathi could hide their hulls. They could not hide their biology, not from humans who had spent centuries mapping war not through strength, but through habit. Within 6 minutes the Aegis Red had slithered into the drift shadow of the Kovathi patrol array near the Thalassa Rift's outer shell. It was a minefield of sensor ghosts, faded drone trails, and the shredded remains of communication lines. Enough noise to mask their presence, but also enough danger to render the operation one mistake from total failure. Monroe stepped closer to the central projection as the overlay resolved. 3 Corvathi ships, lightly armed, 2 powered down, 1 running minimal life support. None expected visitors. Certainly not humans. Relay intrusion ghost on tertiary systems, he ordered, and Kaji's hands moved like a pianist on fire, feeding synthetic latency pulses into the enemy's idle grid, faking diagnostic signals to create a 5-second window where their internal security arrays would accept a false handoff protocoled Aegis Red injected a sliver of code written by Terran cryptographers who had studied Akai mathematical harmonics and converted them into artificial Kovati syntax. A linguistic deception so precise it had taken 2 years and 3 separate AI failures to refine. It worked within moments. The false internal registry was accepted. Earth now saw everything. The data was worse than expected. The Martin's hail hadn't been lured by accident. The log showed falsified planetary research signals projected by drones, designed to mimic deep space. Anomalies specifically tuned to attract Terran anomaly sweepers. They built a fishing net using our own curiosity, Koji said. No anger in her voice, only realization. Monroe didn't move, didn't blink, as the Kovathi logs confirmed the rest orders from a non-military node within their Planetary Defense Bureau, authorizing passive target initiation. Events against ships matching human exploration profiles, categorized under internal files, marked as Phase 1. Behavioral escalation triggers. It wasn't war. Not yet. It was a test that baited Earth. Measured response. Evaluated protocol. Download everything. Leave no trace. Full passive exit trajectory, Monroe said, then paused as one alert blinked on the edge of the screen. A distress call. Weak. Buried in drone layer noise. Human life signature. Frozen. Faint? Is it real? He asked. Koji adjusted the filter bands, eyes narrowing. One survivor pod. Low temp stasis, buried under magnetic debris. Signature's old, but yeah, it's ours. Martin's hail. It didn't all go up. The room held still. Then Monroe gave the second order, the one not written in any protocol but understood in every Terran vessel. We're not leaving him. The extraction was surgical. Cloaked drone relays created a false solar flare in the local scanner spectrum. A mag tether burst extracted the pod from beneath a kilometer of inert metal without firing. A single shot. The Kovathi didn't even register the theft. 38 minutes later, the Aegis Red jumped to dark space. They left no signature, but what they carried rewrote the rules back on Earth. When the data packet arrived in New Geneva's secure command vaults, it did not trigger alarms. It triggered meetings. Within 24 hours, Earth released the logs, publicly, neutrally, with time-stamped forensic overlays. No accusations, no diplomatic slurs. Only verified files, sanitized for emotion, precise in implication. Corvathith Phase 1 was now visible to every Accord species. The reactions were a murmur in the Comnets, hesitant, quiet, unsure if they were witnessing human overreaction or Corvathi overreach. The one phrase began circulating in strategic forums and encoded think tanks. Earth did not strike back, but it struck first with truth. And in the black rooms of species who believed themselves masters of strategic tempo, a new variable entered the equation. What happens when humans choose their battlefield? Not with missiles or fleets, but with information that bleeds without fire. The war had not started, but Earth had opened the case file, and the galaxy had begun. To read the starlight over the VRE passage dimmed in subtle degrees, not because of celestial drift or solar decay, but because a Terran biodome stopped glowing. Colony 7 Pax, nestled along the edge of a trade corridor humans had not even mapped 20 years ago, fell silent at 4:13 local time. No system shutdown, no distress signal, no power fluctuation warnings. It simply ceased to emit. The lights went dark, and then came the message. It wasn't broadcast on military frequencies, nor through the emergency response grid. It arrived as a standard low-priority ping untraceable in origin, delayed by a time-dilated relay that ensured it would surface only when too late. The words were in Terran Standard. Just one sentence, grammatically perfect, emotionally neutral. Your curiosity built this place. Your arrogance buried it. Within the hour, orbital sweep teams from nearby colonies initiated drone overflights. What they found was not destruction, but vacancy. no signs of struggle. No damage to external structures. No breaches in atmosphere. Control, but the people were gone. All of them. 273 settlers, men, women, children, vanished without trace. Their meals sat on untouched tables. Their coms were still logged into local systems, but their biosignatures had been erased with surgical precision. As if plucked from the soil of the colony like roots no longer welcome, the Terran Assembly did not issue a press statement. They did not cry out for justice. They met behind sealed doors, and when the session ended, they invoked an emergency clause not activated since first contact was established with the Vocari a decade ago. Decorum Doctrine, Section 9. A sovereign civilization may act with defensive autonomy beyond its borders if said action preserves peace more effectively than awaiting permission. Colonel Wisra Talib received her orders via direct link from the Assembly itself. She was to take command of Fleet Element 27, a modular force capable of both rapid dispersal and coordinated reinforcement. She was authorized for response calibration under conditions defined as post-hostility recovery deterrence. She would not strike preemptively, but she would ensure that any further violation of Earth's borders, declared or assumed, would not be met with silence. The Colonel's face showed no change as she received the uplink. Her command vessel, TSV Hartmore, was already in position, near the passage's outer corridor. She read the encrypted message once, then activated a secure broadcast to all captains under her command. No return fire unless fired upon. No trespass beyond declared buffer zones. And no ambiguity. If they test the door again, we slam it closed, not to trap them, but to remind them that we built it, reinforced it, and we're the ones holding the keys. Meanwhile, Earth's diplomatic corps deployed its softest weapon, the ethics grid. Public initiative launched across core media, framed not as accusation but as concern. It questioned whether smaller civilizations operating near expansion zones had been adequately educated in the moral parameters of interstellar colonization, highlighting recent disappearances as potential case studies in misunderstood territorial friction. Asterisk. The grid featured no names, no blame, but it posed questions with the gentleness of a dagger hidden inside a legal doctrine. Should sovereign expansion be permitted without enforceable ethical guarantees? If non-lethal disappearances become tools of control, can any neutral zone remain neutral? When a species values data over diplomacy, how long before facts become weapons? Asterisk. Within a week, 5 minor civilizations signed temporary observation pacts with Earth, citing shared concern about non-consensual field experimentation, a phrase coined deliberately to sidestep war accusations while still pressing pressure against the Kulathi and their known proxies. Asterisk. At the same time, Earth's alliance with the Zephan Archivists deepened. The dying silicon-based species, long ignored due to their lack of military power, had found in Earth something it had never found in the older Empire's respect for knowledge without expectation of control. Asterisk. In exchange for long-term habitat access within the Sol Outer Ring, the Zephons granted Earth a compressed archive block containing 3 centuries of intercepted but untranslated Korvathi inner branch messages. Not military grade, but enough to unearth pattern shifts in behavioral doctrine. Enough to fill gaps in the ledger back aboard the Hartmore. Colonel Talib reviewed the analysis summary. Her adjutant, Lieutenant Barr, stood at her side, posture taut, fingers flexing with controlled anticipation. They changed protocol 2 months before the Martin's Hail incident. Barr said, eyes scanning the decrypted pattern logs. There. Directive shifted from containment modeling to escalation tracking testing, not just reaction time, but the ethical threshold of retaliatory behavior. Talib didn't look up from the screen. They weren't studying our defenses. They were studying our restraint, and now they knew it had limits on Earth. In a private chamber beneath the Terran Assembly building, Saito briefed the Oversight Committee. He spoke without anger, without theatrics. He presented slides, spoke in dry sentences, cited timestamps, drew lines on stellar maps that connected anomalies to disappearances to misinformation, leaks, and at the end he simply said, "We have not fired a single first shot." But someone out there believes that. If they prod us enough times without triggering our pain reflex, they will make us forget how to use it at all. I recommend we remind them gently that we do not forget anything, especially not the names of our dead. There was no applause, just quiet agreement and authorization for Project Ledgerfallets. Purpose was not to retaliate. Its purpose was to ensure that if the galaxy insisted on testing Earth's silence, Earth would show them what it sounded like when a species started remembering and started writing everything down. The Aquila Red was not marked on any Accord navigational chart, not flagged under Terran exploratory logs, and not listed in any official Earth Fleet Asset Registry. It did not broadcast identity, nor receive standard docking permissions. It existed in a theoretical corridor where magnetic drift and quantum dust rendered communications unreliable and scanners imprecise. It was invisible not by stealth, but by design, buried inside the noise of the void. It was a ghost ship in orbit around an unclaimed dwarf moon, powered by black crystal reactors gifted by the Zephon archivists and protected by multi-layered refractive shielding tuned to mimic deep space background radiation. It was in every meaningful way not there, and yet it was the most dangerous vessel in Earth's strategic command system inside its core node. Commander Idris Monroe stood before a suspended three-dimensional map, not of stars or fleets or trade routes, but of behavior. The model displayed movement rhythms, alliance recalibrations, overlapping jurisdictional claims, inconsistencies in diplomatic timetables, and algorithmically extrapolated motive trails. It was not a map of space. It was a map of intention. Lieutenant Kogi stood beside him, eyes tracking the glowing arcs of projected intercepts and fake signal relays. The enemy shifting from passive monitoring to indirect engagement. She said, her voice quiet but certain. They're not deploying ships to block us. They're pre-placing ambiguity. Monroe tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing at a point near the Delian Crescent where 4 minor relay points had begun to flicker out of syncage within striking distance of Terran trade corridors. They want us to fire first, he murmured. Not to win, but to confirm a theory. They've stopped measuring our weapons. Now, they're measuring our moral velocity, how far we'll let the line be pushed before we redefine what peace requires. Koji didn't respond with words. She widened the interface field. Dozens of projected points lit up red. Each one was an unknown drone relay operating on frequency bands used exclusively by Accord observers, and yet none were officially logged. Worse, each one existed within 2 light hours of a Terran outpost, research site, or trade path. They weren't armed. They weren't even transmitting threats. They were listening. Sato Anand's face appeared on the secured cum wall, patched in from a diplomatic intelligence substation near the Accord neutral core. His expression was unreadable, but the fatigue behind his eyes was unmistakable. We found internal chatter among the Nidlith diplomats, he said without preamble. They're worried we're escalating without saying it. Our silence is becoming louder than our words. Monroe responded without turning. Let them be worried. We've spoken. Enough. Now they get to interpret what they refuse to hear. Back on Earth, the Assembly authorized protocol spiral break under a narrow vote margin. It was not war. It was corridor realignment under passive denial directives, a complex name for a simple strategy Earth would not strike. But it would no longer allow anyone to hold a weapon to its spine while pretending to offer a handshake within 48 hours, Earth began dispatching dual-use vessels half medical, half comes relays to reinforce its outer trade paths. Their movements were slow, predictable, fully public. The hulls bore no weapons, but bristled with countermeasure arrays and stealth-anchored decoy drones equipped to scramble lock-on protocols in a radius of several light minutes. From an outside perspective, it was merely a routine upgrade, but the placement of the ships created corridors through which nothing could pass without being tracked, disarmed, or catalogued. Earth hadn't fired a single shot, but it had constructed a passage grid that redefined the boundaries of exposure. Sato called it legalized denial by infrastructure, and the galaxy began to understand its implications on accord channels. Nervous speculations surfaced. Volcari news relays accused Earth of secret militarization. Kovathi analysts declared the realignment a violation of expansion restraint protocols. Even the Archaea species known for cold detachment issued a statement questioning Earth's aggressive logistics. But Earth did not respond to the accusations. Instead, it published all ship manifests, full diplomatic logs, and unfiltered motion data from the spiral break deployments, openly inviting every Accord member to audit the deployments and witness their legality. Every beacon, every vector, every path was open for inspection. The statement attached read only, "We cannot silence those who shout, but we can light a road wide enough that even their lies must walk beside our facts." And for the first time in recent galactic history, the species long considered young, erratic, and overly reactive had crafted a move so strategically calm that it outpaced the expectations of its rivals. Back aboard the Aquila Red, Monroe watched as several Kovathi interceptors altered their drift patterns away from the corridor lines. It was not retreat, but it was recognition. "They're adjusting," Koji said softly. "They're realizing," Monroe corrected. "They expected resistance. They found refusal. Now they have to decide whether escalation is still a winning play when the opponent answers each fire with foundation, each threat with transparency, each provocation with preemptive proof." He leaned closer to the map, watching a new pattern begin to form. Volcari sensor buoys lighting up in pairs, Akai pathfinders holding position near legal neutrality zones, even the Nidlith redirecting scout teams away from Terran proximity. It was the beginning of a shift not in power, but in perception, and perception, Monroe knew, was the true battlefield of any civilization rising too quickly for the comfort of its elders. "Let them look," he said quietly, "because the next time they blink will be the ones writing the terms of the silence they once used against us." The silence over the Talisar Rift was not natural. It had been shape-carved from the refusal of missiles, the refusal of confrontation, the refusal to dance to the rhythm others had orchestrated long before Earth took its seat in the Accord. But this silence had become louder than war, louder than treaties. It had become unignorable, so the galaxy sent a question, wrapped in protocol, hidden in pleasantry, but edged with warning. The Archaea Sovereign Directive on Strategic Equilibrium summoned Earth to a closed forum, one where questions would not be public and answers would not be optional. The chamber was smaller than most, intentionally so. No spectators, no cameras, only decision-makers seated across from each other like minds at war beneath a table dressed in ceremonial peace. Colonel Wizra Talib stood for Earth, though her presence caused murmurs from species who had expected a diplomat, not a soldier. But Earth no longer trusted the illusion of neutrality when neutrality had failed to protect its people. Across from her, Chancellor Varakes of the Archaea folded his long fingers into a gesture of controlled inquiry, his second eyelid lowering in what passed for focus among his kind. He spoke first. "You have deployed over 36 corridor-defining vessels without consulting the Strategic Movement Committee, redirected 12 trade vectors under non-accord pattern compliance, and published telemetry streams that suggest multiple intercepts of Kovathi assets outside your declared borders. Does Earth no longer recognize the sovereignty of interstellar balance? Colonel Talib met his gaze without blinking, without posturing, and replied in a voice as steady as orbital gravity. Earth recognizes balance when it exists, but we also recognize patterns of threat disguised as bureaucracy. And when our explorers are lured into dead zones, our colonies erased without trace, and our ships monitored by unregistered drones, while protocol delays accountability, we no longer call that balance. We call it preparation. Chancellor Varex's expression did not change, but the shift in tension was felt across the chamber. The Vocari representative narrowed her eyes. The Nidlith envoy adjusted her breathing plume. None spoke yet. The Chancellor continued. Your silence has created instability. The Accord fears escalation through inference. Perhaps it is time to clarify your position, not through innuendo or legal rigorection, but plainly. Is Earth preparing for war? Sato Anand, seated beside Talib, leaned forward. His tone was measured, patient, cold. No, Earth is preparing for truth to become survivable. And if the only language your alliances understand is military posture, then our presence will appear militant, no matter what we intend. But make no mistake, Chancellor, we will not start your war for you. You'll have to walk through us to build it. The room fell into a silence that was not formal, it was calculating. The Vocari representative broke it first. You hold your silence like a shield, she said, voice clipped, metallic. But shields become weapons if wielded long enough in opposition. Others may not wait for you to finish your proof before reacting as though you've already struck. Talib nodded once, slowly. They are free to assume. We are free to be ready. The meeting adjourned with no conclusion, but by the next sunrise. Across 3 sectors, 17 new trade requests had been filed with Earth. 2 minor species offered science partnerships. 1 rogue trader offered to sell Kavathi encryption keys in exchange for asylum and far beyond the halls of diplomacy, in the cold orbit above a quiet blue colony moon. A Terran drone discovered something beneath the Raqqa-buried relay Nodi Kovathi. Design its logs revealed a chilling directive. Simulated collapse. Phase 2 psychological. Cascade trials. They hadn't just tested Earth's system. Theed tested Earth's will back aboard the TSV Hartmore. Talib studied the relays. Data in silence before speaking to her assembled captains. They thought our restraint was a weakness they could mine. They wanted us to break character, to become the monster they've always feared we were. But we don't break. She turned, her eyes sharp beneath steel-gray command light. We evolve. We build. We endure. And if that terrifies them, then good. Let fear be the first honest thing they've felt about us. And in space, around every Terran colony and corridor, new satellites began to deploy not weapons, not walls, but mirrors devices that captured everything, streamed everything, proved everything, because Earth had learned that in a galaxy of shadows, truth itself must be weaponized, and this time, it would be aimed without apology. The mirrors turned silently and orbit-synchronized Terran observation platforms equipped with deep scan, relay-bounce encryption, and cold AI processors trained to catalog not intent, but pattern. They were not sentinels, not satellites of defense, and certainly not weapons. But to the galaxy, they might as well have been missiles wrapped in philosophy. They reflected not light, but truth. And truth, the kind Earth was now showing, burned hotter than plasma on the 3rd orbital day after mirror deployment. One of the new installations over the Vatari Drift recorded a vessel entering Terran-adjacent space. It bore a neutral registration and Accord-compliant identification codes. It hailed Earth in perfect diplomatic syntax. And yet its engine profile, maneuver rhythm, and whole residue betrayed a different origin Korvathi shadow fleet. Not officially military, Not officially anything. Commander Idris Monroe aboard the Aquila Red received the mirror feed in real time. And even before the ship finished its transmission, he was already mapping its velocity curve and exit contingencies. They want us to react publicly, Koji murmured beside him, studying the raw data. Force our hand. Make it look like we intercept innocence under the mask of paranoia. Monroe's voice was as flat as starless gravity. Then we don't intercept. We don't fire. We follow protocol. He lifted a hand and keyed a silent command. 3 micro-relays jumped into formation, unarmed but tuned to every atmospheric emission the ship could produce, recording not just trajectory and signal, but behavioral latency, the tiny hesitations and speed shifts that mark trained military pilots even in civilian hulls. We don't catch them. Monroe said, we record them until they realize we've already filed the indictment, published it, and scheduled the verdict before they've even left our sector. Within 2 hours, the entire encounter unfiltered was streamed to the public Accord information grid with open commentary from Terran science officers, navigational analysts, and legal observers. Every anomaly flagged. Every motion compared to the last 32 Corvathi deployments. Every deception exposed with dispassionate, exhaustive precision. Earth still had not fired a shot, but the narrative had begun to detonate elsewhere. In the Accord's political core near the Galthis spine, Chancellor Varex convened a private emergency roundtable bringing together the Archai, the Vakari, and 4 minor powers growing increasingly unsettled by Earth's tactics. They are destabilizing expectations, Varex said without flourish. Their restraint no longer signals weakness, it signals discipline so absolute it becomes unnerving. They've made even silence a calculated threat. The Vokari envoy, Admiral Kesharon, flicked her clawed hand in irritation. Then let us end the pretense. Escalate inspection. Demand deactivation of those mirrors. Earth's transparency is a trap. They weaponize visibility the way others weaponize stealth. But the Nidlith, ancient and cautious, pulsed softly from her translucent throat lantern, speaking through the rich hum of layered breath. Or perhaps it is not Earth who makes truth a weapon, but we who have long made truth unbearable. Back on Earth, in a sealed subterranean command vault beneath New Geneva, Colonel Wisra Talib prepared for what the military designations now referred to as Stage Delta, preemptive clarity. She addressed the assembly of Earth's strategic captains, her voice firm but never raised. We've shifted the battlefield, not by force, not by fleet, but by reflection. They wanted a war where we'd swing first and lose legitimacy. Instead, we gave them mirrors, and now they have to watch themselves violate everything they wrote in their own treaties. Captain Devereux, commander of the TSV Hammerfall, leaned forward. But what if they no longer care about treaties? What if they choose to blind the mirrors, to silence our reflection the way they silenced the Martin's hail? Talib's answer was cold steel drawn in logic. Then we don't respond with silence. We respond with exposure. For every mirror they blind, we shine 100 more. For every lie they float, we answer with layered, time-stamped proof. We don't bury them in weaponry. We bury them in accountability. No species survives long when the galaxy starts seeing them for what they are, unfiltered. And in orbit, across 4 sectors, a new protocol activated Glaspherenet an attack. A relay surge Earth's mirror network began streaming not just real-time data, but predictive models of conflict escalation, showing which species were drifting toward instability, which factions were manipulating corridor pressure points, which leaders were funding illegal drone deployments in contested zones. It wasn't a threat, it was a forecast, and the galaxy, forced to look at itself through Earth's eyes, began to feel the heat, not of Earth's firepower, but of Earth's focus, because now, Earth didn't need to be feared to win it, only needed to make sure the galaxy saw everything before anyone could hide it. And somewhere, Across thousands of sectors, an old proverb began to be rewritten in whispers among those who'd long watched. The humans rise. Humanity does not burn the stars. It makes the stars burn themselves in their own reflection. The Korvathi did not announce their move with a fleet. They did not march across a border or ignite a signal flare of war. What they did was colder calculated. They issued a sudden reclassification of territorial boundaries, retroactively claiming that 3 of Earth's mirror arrays had been placed in a legacy corridor of cultural significance to Korvathi spiritual vectors, a legal fiction. But one designed not to be debated, only obeyed within 6 standard hours. 2 of the mirror platforms vanished, not destroyed. Removed asterisk precision pulses disrupted their orbital positioning systems, drawing them into automated collectors that dragged them into unmapped folds of subspace interference. No heat signatures, no casualties, just absence, executed like an erasure from history. But Earth did not blink. The mirrors were never unprotected. Each unit was embedded with redundant telemetry. Shards scattered through space in undetectable cloaked micropods. Their final logs transmitted silently across untraceable pulse skips and refracted through Earth's deep space AI daisy-chained. So when the Korvathi thought they had stolen silence, what they had truly taken was a confession from her command node on the TSV Hartmore. Colonel Woisra Talib stood before her officers, hands behind her back, as the logs lit up frame by frame, showing a full 3D reconstruction of the extraction. Patterns, the resonance fields used, the trajectory of the pulse lances, and even the vessel class responsible. The Korvathi have now crossed a line they themselves drew, Talib said, voice stripped of ceremony. They invoked non-aggression treaties for decades. Now they violate not only territory, but principle, without saying it aloud. This was meant to be a strike that carried no echo. We'll give it 1 asterisk. Back on Earth, Saito presented the findings not to the Assembly, but to the Accord directly. He stepped into the Grand Assembly Hall of the Accord Council alone, carrying no guards, no data pads, only a single transponder bead behind his left ear, and a quiet voice in front of 73 envoys and 3 emissaries of sovereign galactic blocks. He began to speak not in accusation, but with detail. The Korvathi action was not a territorial enforcement. It was an attempt to edit memory itself. They sought to unmake evidence, not confront it. They intended a strike without sound, so no one would be forced to respond. I am here to ensure that silence does not serve them. He paused, then triggered. The broadcast, every seat in the hall, received a direct stream of the extraction, a mirror's final seconds, a pulse signature, the arc of containment lances, the vessel IDs cross-referenced with Korvathi dry dock registries. No theory, just proof. The Terran Accord, Saito continued, has always stated we do not start wars. This remains true. But I remind you now, Earth has never said it does not finish them. The room did not erupt, but neither did it dismiss by the next cycle. 3 neutral species formally requested Earth to provide mirror services for their own trade zones. 2 others sent diplomatic inquiries asking how such precision was achieved without loss of life. Earth's restraint had become its currency, and that currency now bought influence. The Korvathi responded not in words, but through proxies. Pirate attacks surged along fringe Terran routes. Independent stations near Earth's allies began to suffer from unexplained data wipes. Autonomous drones encountered mimic probes, broadcasting false distress beacons, and then one Terran vessel, a mobile hospital ship carrying civilians and Zephan scientists, was forced into an emergency warp corridor by falsified gravitational data. It vanished, not exploded, not boarded, simply pulled off the map. The loss report hit New Geneva 23 hours later. Saito did not speak. Only forwarded the report to one recipient, Colonel Talib. Her reply came in less than a minute. Activate. Judgment Array. Full file lock authorization. Legal basis. Repeated patent violation of ethical space. No declaration. No contact. Execute under precedent silence doctrine. And from the dark edge of Sector Omega-4, something stirred. A vessel not built for diplomacy, not for reflection asterisk, but for closure. TSV Daedalus, a ship never publicly acknowledged, never used, never needed. Until now its hull bore no weapon marks, but its frame was built from the mathematics of restraint. Its AI carried a single command loop. Strike only when they're brave. Silence becomes louder than our truth. And tonight, silence had screamed too long. The Daedalus began to move, and the galaxy finally began to understand what Earth had been preparing for. Not war, not domination, but an ending none of them had believed we would ever choose to write. The Daedalus did not emerge like a conqueror. It came through space like a thought too long withheld, silent, sharp, unmissable. It passed through 5 border arrays undetected, slipped between scanner fields, and flared into real space, precisely 0.3 light seconds outside the Corvathi's clandestine observation stronghold on the edge of the Kestari expanse. No warning, no call, just presence. Its hull bore no insignia, no threat signals. But every inch of it was shaped from Earth's longest-held lessons, not from battles won, but from wars avoided, peace maintained by doctrine rather than dread. Until now, inside the command deck, Colonel Wisra Talib stood in full uniform, no emotion crossing her face, her hand resting calmly over the haptic ignition band for the judgment array. The weapon was not explosive in nature. It was conceptual, a cascading compression field that would unravel data systems, erase vaults, and sever memory cores within every known format of Corvathi intelligence infrastructure. Weapon of memory, a weapon of truth denial reversal. Koji's voice came through the secure channel from the Aquila Red station just inside the Accord Shadow Zone. Command confirms the site contains black records of the Martin's Hale interception, the 7 Pox disappearance, and the false Phase 2 trials. You're cleared. The mirrors are already recording. Talib nodded once and pressed the trigger. The effect was not visual but across the Corvathi datanet. Silence shattered, entire dark archives folded in on themselves. Hidden logs blinked into global streams before collapsing into entropy. The memory of denial died, but not before speaking its truth aloud. The Corvathi scrambled ships, fired distress beacons, screamed of Terran betrayal, but Earth had never declared war. Earth had declared accounting, and now the ledger was closed back on New Geneva. Sato Anand stood before the assembly once more. He did not explain what the Daedalus had done. He only repeated Earth's first and final position. We did not start this. We never would have. But we were never going to let the last line of the story be written by those who erase evidence and call it victory. The assembly did not vote. They stood unanimously and submitted a formal closure request to the Accord, citing the incident as a resolved ethical correction, not a war. The Accord, shaken by the evidence poured into the public stream by the mirrors, did not protest. Some envoys left the chamber in silence. Others filed motions to revisit decades of unexamined military conduct. The Corvathi? They did not respond. They retreated inward. Their proxies vanished from Terran corridors, and their diplomacy fell into procedural paralysis. The war never came, because Earth never wanted one. But they had built the key, just in case and when the galaxy asked how humans so young, so unproven, had outmaneuvered centuries of silence and supremacy. The answer came not in triumph, but in a phrase whispered from planet to planet, station to ship, mirror to memory. We do not raise our fists first. We raise our reflection. And if you strike that, then may your lies be the first casualty. The Daedalus never returned to port. It became a myth, a weapon Earth no longer needed, because after this, The galaxy began to speak more carefully when it spoke of peace, not because it feared Earth asterisk, but because now it believed Earth, and sometimes that is all it takes to stop the next war, even when Earth is still knocking at the door, patiently, relentlessly, unwilling to forget.